Why do I need to learn another language? Everyone around me speaks English. It's a waste of time. That super cool guy was me in high school, sharing what I'm certain is a pretty common sentiment among American kids, especially of my generation. Little did I know at the time that not only would I eventually learn Spanish, but that it would end up being the first step to my life in Germany. My name is Joe Baur, an American who emigrated to Germany 10 years ago and travels around the world to bridge the gap between the story we're told about a place and the reality on the ground. And I never would have gotten to Germany if I didn't learn Spanish. I grew up in a wildly homogeneous suburban American town with about as much diversity as, a stack of paper plates. The idea that there was a world beyond what I could see with my own eyes was a pretty foreign concept. This is pre-internet, people, so give me a break. Jurassic Park made more sense to me than moving abroad and learning a new language. But just as that Virgin Mary Velociraptor managed to hatch some eggs, life finds a way. And in this case, life found a way to show me how learning some Español could change my life. But it wasn't because of some inspirational teacher. I wish. My Spanish teacher was a very nice guy, but his teaching style was about as dull as can be. It was an absolute struggle not to fall asleep underneath the fluorescent lights of a windowless room, listening to the monotone repetitions of textbook conjugation. What did the trick was studying abroad in India and living on campus with Tibetans in exile. That entire experience is what gave me the travel bug and idea of living abroad later in life. But it was learning the phrase tashidele that gave me my first taste of how saying something, anything at all in a local language, can really open people up and change their perception of you as, just another dumb tourist. A few years after graduating college, I felt restless in the United States and wanted to revisit this idea of living abroad. I was of an age where going to graduate school seemed like a smart adult decision. So I started looking for schools overseas, and that landed me at the University for Peace in Costa Rica. Before you give me too many props, my program was in English. But I didn't want to be the ugly gringo who just showed up yelling, "Donde está la biblioteca?" I wanted to learn Spanish. And that's where today's partner, italki, came in. italki is an online language learning platform that connects students with native speaking tutors and professional teachers for one-on-one video lessons. Operating on a flexible pay-as-you-go model with no subscriptions, it offers instruction in over 150 languages, with prices typically starting around $4 per lesson. It's real teachers, real video lessons, not just an app quizzing you on flashcards or, a bird mascot shaming you for missing a few days of practice. You find someone who teaches what you actually need, and you just start talking like you would in real life, learning the sounds, rhythms, and cadence of how people really talk rather than a bizarre combination of sentences you'll never actually use. The bear sings opera to the gorilla in the bathroom? Practical human-to-human lessons with italki are what gave me the confidence to speak with people in person. And holy hell, did that come in handy in El Salvador and Germany. But I'll come back to that. Click the link below in the description to start your own language learning journey. Buy $10, get $5 off your first lesson with my code BAUR. Oh, hey, that's my name. That discount's only good for the first 50 people, so don't do what I did in school and sleep on language learning, because it really does change the way you look at the world and how the world receives you. For example, while living in Costa Rica, I wanted to make the most of visiting my new Central American neighbors. Over winter break, my wife and I spent a week in El Salvador. This presented a new linguistic challenge. There's far more tourism and international residents in Costa Rica, so there's just more English being spoken than in El Salvador. Now let me cut to the chase. Visiting El Salvador was one of those moments that changed the trajectory of my life and how I see the world. For as long as I was aware of El Salvador being a country, it had been portrayed to me as an impossibly dangerous place that you couldn't visit without risking serious harm. But being there on the ground, from Santa Tecla to Xochitoro and El Cerro to El Tunco, I saw that the story I was told about this place didn't match the reality on the ground. That's not just a tagline I ramble off at the start of my videos. That's an honest-to-God truth I learned in El Salvador and have been able to apply to my travels around the world ever since. It made me yearn to travel to these places unfairly demeaned by mainstream media and see for myself what the truth is by meeting people and hearing their story. And in a country like El Salvador, where English isn't widely spoken, being able to speak Spanish was absolutely crucial to being able to hear those stories. From the groundskeeper who fought in the Civil War to the employee at Centro Arte para la Paz in Xochitoro, who explained how they're honoring the memory of those who died from the violence of war, all the while building a community based on peace. All of those moments that continue to impact my life are gone if all I know is "Donde está la biblioteca?" or "Cuánto cuesta la cerveza?" Not saying that libraries or the price of beer aren't important, but you know what I mean. But what I never could have expected is how learning Spanish would end up being the reason I ended up in Germany. By June of 2015, I was back in the United States, and it didn't take long before my wife and I started floating the idea of Europe. Costa Rica showed me the value of living abroad, how much I enjoyed it, and I long dreamed of trying someplace in Europe for the very noble reason of trains. I really like trains. Then later that year, I went to a travel conference in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I remember very little about the conference now. The memory is mostly a dark blur, lost to the brain equivalent of your laptop's trash can. But that memory shifts into focus when I think about the booth for Trivago. You might know them as the one with that guy from the commercials a lot of American women wanted to bang. Good for you, Trivago guy. Good for you. I knew nothing about Trivago at the time, so I'm not even sure what compelled me to stop by the booth. But after another visitor left their booth, I noticed the two women working there started to speak Spanish to each other. I was still riding high off Costa Rica, so I figured I'd show off a little and introduce myself in Spanish. Because as we've already established, this gringo knows where the library is and how much beer costs. I made a dumb joke saying that we could speak Spanish if they wanted to take a break from English. Now, as lame as that is, I'm convinced it endeared me to them in some way, shape, or form. Here's why. As we were talking, I find out that Trivago is based in Dusseldorf, Germany, and that they were from Mexico. By this point, I knew it was difficult for non-EU citizens to get a visa sponsor, so I was intrigued to learn more about how they made it happen. Trivago, as it turned out, was keen to hire employees from all over the world to work for their respective home markets, but from Germany. We exchanged business cards, and fast forward, they connected me to the right people at the company to eventually land a job working for the US market from their offices in Dusseldorf, facilitating our move to Germany nearly 10 years ago to this day. And that, of course, meant jumping on a new language, German, sending me right back to italki. Because although there's this assumption that you can just speak English in Germany, that doesn't really work as an immigrant. English is definitely largely proficient if you're a tourist going to hotels and restaurants, but not a single official at the Landesamt für Einwanderung would speak English even if they had the ability to. Fun side story, I was once at an appointment with my wife translating for her, and then we found out that the person holding the meeting working for the Landesamt für Einwanderung was born in West Virginia. So I was translating English for my wife into German for her, German back to English, and the woman was born in West Virginia. Not to mention, like in Costa Rica or El Salvador, learning German made this country feel like home far more quickly. I could communicate with my neighbors, make dumb jokes with passersby on the trails, and perhaps most importantly, become a citizen. And that, sports fans, is how just one conversation in Spanish set up my life here in Germany. But that's not to say it's been 100% smooth sailing since moving to Germany. There's been a lot to learn along the way, and in this video, I talk about the 18 things not to do in Germany. And I know what you're wondering. Yes, there is nudity.